Well, welcome back. It's close enough to my start time. So, uh, yeah, today, welcome back. Hope everybody had a great week. Mine went well. Certainly last week, I was in a class talking about the end of the Cold War with this AP European History class, and the teacher had contacted me ahead of time and said, "Do you know anything about this?" And I go, "Yeah." And I lived through half of it, and I'm going on about talking about this, and there was there was an event. Some of you may remember there was an event in the 1970s, an agreement between the West and the East called the Helsinki Accords. And basically, what happened in the Helsinki Accords is the West, NATO, and U.S. and NATO, and U.S. and Russia, and Soviet Union, and the Warsaw Pact got together and agreed that everybody would leave everybody alone and would, this is ours and that's yours and we won't. And so the way to describe this to the class was I described it as a DTR. You know what a DTR is? Everybody know what a DTR is? Debbie knows what a DTR is. A DTR is in any sort of semi-quasi-romantic relationship, there comes a moment where you have to define the relationship, DTR. It's to say, okay, are we boyfriend, girlfriend? Are we going steady? And you have to have this DTR, where you kind of say, these are the lines. And so I described that and said, you do this in a relationship. You say, these are the lines, this is what et cetera, and that's what the Helsinki Accords were. And I'm confident, after being in this class for 3 days, that they don't know a thing about the Helsinki Accords, but they do know what a DTR is. So I feel like I succeeded in my time there. But it's good to be back here. Today is April 28th. A red letter day in history, because it was on this date in 1789 that there was a mutiny on board the HMS Bounty. The mutiny on the Bounty took place today, which is a really interesting story. I don't know if anybody's ever read, there's actually a series of books. There's the book The Mutiny on the Bounty, then there's a sequel to it called Men Against the Sea, and then there's another book called Pitcairn Island, because the Captain Bligh, there's been at least 3 movies, I think. One with, I forget who, like Clark Gable or something like that, and one with Mel Gibson, not at the same time, but Jimmy Cagney was in it as Captain Bligh, and so they put the bounty, the mutiny took place somewhere in the Pacific, I believe it was the Pacific, and they put Captain Bligh and a few of his loyals in a rowboat over the side of the ship, and they survived. Captain Bligh managed to steer the sailboat back to an island or somewhere to safety, which is in that era an amazing feat of seamanship, kind of, that the skill that it took to do that was amazing. And then they all went, the settlers or the mutineers all ended up on a place called Pitcairn Island, which is still around. It's still there, and there are still descendants of the Bounty mutineers that are on that island. But that took place on this date in 1789. It was on this date in 1878 that Lionel Barrymore was born. Lionel Barrymore. Lionel Barrymore would be the brother of John Barrymore and the brother also of Ethel Barrymore. The Barrymore, there were 3 of them. Great theater family. John Barrymore was one of the great Hamlets, Shakespearean actors of the early part of the 20th century. You may know him as being the grandfather of Drew Barrymore. So Drew Barrymore's father was an actor, and it's kind of a tremendous acting family. But he was born on this date in 1878. If you watched, Lionel Barrymore was in a lot of films. I believe he was in The one where the angel gets his wings.
It's a Wonderful
It's a Wonderful Life.
Evil Mr. Potter.
He's in that.
He's in the, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I knew he was in the movie. I couldn't remember which one.
Can't Take It With You.
Okay, Can't Take It With You. Okay. There's actually going to be a local theater production of You Can't Take It With You coming up. That a friend of mine, one of my scout friends, who's slightly younger than me, but still old enough to know better, signed up to have a part in, and so we're going to go see that. It's in Lockport, Lockport, no, Mokina, Frankfurt, somewhere down there, but Lionel Barrymore's birthday today, 1878. Also born in this date in 1908, Lionel. Not sure if I might have copied that. Schindler, Oscar Schindler, as in Schindler's List. Oscar Schindler was born in this date in 1908. In 1928 was the first trial of a TV in a home. They put 3 TVs. They had a 1.5-inch screen. So that's just what. Now we're coming back to that, right? Isn't that how it worked? That was 2 years later. They had a first organized night baseball game. 1930. 1930 was the first organized baseball game. 1947, has anybody read or heard or remember? Now see, when I'm talking to the kids at Bolingbrook, nobody ever gets any of this stuff. This is why I have to take it out on y'all, because they don't get any of this stuff, right? I go, Barrymore, who? What? Drew Barrymore? Who's that? If she hasn't made a movie since the pandemic, they have no idea who it is. But Kon-Tiki, does that ring a bell? Thor Heyerdahl and Kon-Tiki set sail from Peru to the Philippines. I'm sorry, to Polynesia on this day. This is where he kind of outfitted a boat, kind of like how they used to do it, and wrote a book, and there was a TV show and all that kind of stuff.
Did he actually make it?
Yeah.
I remember it was a native kind of book. I don't remember.
Yeah. I have the book. I haven't read it. It was one of those deals that I bought it like an antique mall or a garage sale or something like that. I saw a thing. I follow on Instagram. I follow something called the Goodwill Librarian, that has these things about collecting books and having books, and they describe that buying books is like buying wine. So you don't buy wine and just drink it right away. You have to let it age. See, so I have several books that are aging on my shelf, just waiting for the right moment. So maybe today, after I go home, I think, Kon-Tiki, I'm going to read that book finally, kind of thing. But on this date in 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, Mossadegh, was elected Prime Minister of Iran. And this was among many reasons, but he ran afoul of the British petroleum companies and U.S. petroleum interests, because he wanted to nationalize them in Iran. And so the British and the CIA and the Dulles brothers arranged a coup that kicked him out of office and brought back the Shah of Iran. Put the Shah of Iran back in power at that time. And this, again, that was 2 years later when he was deposed. And Iran never forgave the West for that. Still hasn't. It's still there's a lot, but this is one of the things that we brought back the Shah. And then, of course, the Shah had his issues, very brutal leader during his time, and of course, then he was deposed or got cancer and came to the U.S., and so there was a hostage crisis and all that, which was something I talked to one of my other classes about, because we watched the movie Argo. Has anybody seen Argo? The movie Argo? It's an interesting film if you haven't seen it. Fun little film. And also, finally, this is the last thing. No good medieval philosophers today. Sorry, I know some of you are like, man, I hope we have another long discussion about a medieval philosopher. But it was on this date in 1986. Now, this is an important distinction. It was on this date in 1986 that the Soviet TV announced to the Soviet Union the Chernobyl incident. Okay. Now, why it's interesting is because the Chernobyl incident was where this nuclear power plant kind of melted down in a cloud. Okay. They announced it 2 days after it actually happened. So just think about that for a minute. You've got this nuclear power plant. There's a cloud going overhead, and I think the only reason they noticed it, or the only reason they announced, I shouldn't say only, but one of the reasons why they announced it was because Western countries were noticing radioactive particles in the atmosphere, and they're kind of wondering, hey, and then some people are starting to ask, why is there a radioactive cloud over Sweden? Kind of, I don't know if it was Sweden, but there was this cloud that was kind of floating around. And so this was one of the things that kind of led to the downfall of the Soviet Union, which is, one of many things that led to the downfall of the Soviet Union that I got to talk about this week, along with defining the relationship, which is, you all are going to, I don't know if you know, somebody, who did you go to the thing with? So when Debbie and I met at the camp we met at, part of the backstory to the camp we met at was that I went to that camp in order to have a DTR with another girl that had always gone to this particular camp. See, like every year she was faithful going to this camp. And so I'm going to sign it. We're going to get things. I'm going to say, look, she didn't go.
Too bad.
Yeah. Debbie's been crushed ever since. Felt sorry for them ever since. But all right. So we are in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians. We're actually beyond the halfway point. Yay! Almost done. Well, maybe not almost done. And today we're going to just plow through 2 chapters. We're going to get through 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 today. I told Debbie on the way up here that it was as long as I could focus, and that maybe she should have a signal that she could give me that I was kind of getting off track. And she suggested, well, what if I jump up and down and do this and say, you're getting off track? And I said, no, I'll never notice that. Too subtle kind of thing. Right now she's saying, you're getting off track. If you remember, we're talking about Paul's letter, and there's been a series of communications between Paul and the church at Corinth. He visited there. He built the church. He founded the church. He brought the gospel to there. We notice that. We know that from Acts. Then we know that there was communication between them, the result of which was 1 Corinthians. They sent a letter. Paul writes 1 Corinthians, a series of responses to specific situations in the church at Corinth. After that, there's another visit, a short visit he talks about, and then there's some more communication letters going back and forth, and Paul wants to make a visit, but he sends what he calls a tearful letter, and then to find out whether there's still an issue. There's still an issue. It's either a person or it's a group of people that are not accepting his position, his authority, his instructions, his direction. And so he sends Titus, and we find out pretty much all of this by chapter 2. He sends Titus to the church because he doesn't want to go. He figures if I go, it'll be too awkward, so I'm going to send Titus. And we find out, and so the first 6 chapters of 2 Corinthians are Paul trying to reason with the church at Corinth, to follow his lead, to follow his authority, to kind of get back on track. And I kind of likened it to an adult parent trying to convince his kid to do something. And again, it's not, for those of you who have the adult children, it's not as simple as it used to be. Kind of the days. I mean, do any of you see parents walking around with these little things, and you think, oh, they're so cute, just wait. You have no idea. You have no idea, kind of thing. And my kids were pretty good. I think, I don't know, most of them, but one of them, as far as we know, they're good at covering things up, if nothing else. And so then in chapter 7, we discover that that Titus has returned, and Titus has returned and has great news for Paul. That is, whatever the issue in Corinth, at the church of Corinth, has been resolved. That the church is enthusiastic and is wanting to follow Paul's lead on whatever he has to talk to them. And this makes Paul very, very happy. His joy is full. We talked about all of that last week. And then we get into chapter 8, and Paul starts talking about an offering. So now that we know everybody's in a good mood, that we're all on the same page, let me talk about your wallet. It's really what it does. And I've been thinking about this all along, and I'm going to kind of set up this scenario, because again, we don't really know. It's all speculation. So this is my current speculation, that the offering was the problem all along. Okay? And we'll find out as we go through chapter 8 and 9 that apparently the Corinthian church had made some sort of commitment to an offering, and that apparently wasn't happening. And it wasn't happening, and this is speculation, so feel free to disagree with me if you want. It wasn't happening because somebody was blocking it. Somebody was saying, no, we don't need to do that, or no, that's not the right use of the money, or no, we can't afford it, or whatever. Paul has no right to ask us. Something along that line. And so the offering was the issue all along. Does that make sense? And so Paul's like, listen, and in order, he can't just come in and write a letter, he can't just send a text, show me the money. That would have been, some of you get, show me the money, right? Yeah. Nobody in the 9th grade would have gotten that. None, I'm just saying. But he's got to rebuild his authority to kind of get to the point of where he's saying, okay, what about this offering that you guys committed to? And that kind of ties everything together. So if you want to look at this and say, because I was talking last week that chapter 7 seemed like it was could be a separate letter. I still think it could be, or at least it wasn't written at the same time. It's just the mood and the tone and the attitude of Paul is so different in chapter 7 than it is from chapters 1 through 6 that I think it was certainly written at a different time. That he started writing it, waited. Titus comes back, he writes chapter 7. And now he's saying, okay, we're through that first thing. Now let's get back to the original problem. Okay, and you know how that goes, right? You've had a situation with someone. It could be a child, it could be a spouse, it could be some coworker, whatever. Somebody where there's some issue. You can't get him or her to do something, or they won't do something, or they did something wrong, and you need to address it. But in order to get to that, you kind of got to work through the baggage. Who are you to tell me what to do? What do you, blah, blah, blah. So finally you work through all of that. Okay, we're all on the same page. Okay, now let's get back to how badly you did this. I wouldn't phrase it that way, because then you're right back to the start. But so in chapter 8, Paul changes the subject abruptly, perhaps, to talk about the church in Macedonia. Now, if you remember, Paul is in Macedonia in Acts, and at the first part of 2 Corinthians, Paul says that he went to Troas looking for Titus. He doesn't find Titus in Troas, so he goes on to Macedonia to look for Titus. Okay? So he's going to talk about what the church at Macedonia. So now he's there and he's going to share what that church is doing. Okay? And again, Paul went to Macedonia in 1:16 looking for Titus. Now, beginning with verse 1 of chapter 8. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. So Paul notes here the extreme grace of the Macedonian church. Okay, that's important because he starts with grace, he ends with grace at the end of chapter 9. Okay, so Paul notes the extreme grace of the Macedonian church in the midst of their very severe trial, their overflowing joy, and their extreme poverty. So Paul walks into this church and wow, these guys have some issues. Okay, and now we don't exactly know what's causing this. It could be persecution, it could be famine, it could be economic, it could be any number of things. But whatever it was, despite all these trials that this church, the problems that this church in Macedonia had, they were able to come up with a very generous offering to give to Paul. Now, what is this offering for? Well, we don't know. Okay, there's no specific, it's like whoever, they certainly knew about it, but we know, and most people looking at this think that it has to do with an offering taken for the poor in Jerusalem. Because in Acts chapter, Paul's first or second missionary journey, I forget which one it was, specifically was to collect an offering for the poor in Jerusalem, in and around Jerusalem. Okay, so most people think that this is probably the same offering the same gift to be given to another church for another community for its people. Okay, and this church at Macedonia, despite not having their own issues, are able to come up with a very generous, to Paul, a very generous offering at that point. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their abilities. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. Okay, so they gave as much as they were able, sometimes more. And what I find interesting here is Paul is up there, and maybe he's talking about the need, or maybe he's just kind of, because that's kind of his thing or whatever. But Paul doesn't launch a capital campaign here. Okay? It does not appear that Paul is standing up in the church and saying, here, I'm going to show you slides of starving kids, and then we're going to take a love offering or anything like that. Okay? It says that they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. Okay, and I just think about that. It's like, when was the last time we looked at the offering at our church like that? Okay, if we skipped taking the offering, who would notice? I mean, some people would. I get it. Some people would, and it would be like, wait, what? Isn't there? What? If we went 2 weeks without taking an offering, would anybody get upset? I doubt it. I mean, there might be one or two, but I'm just starting to think about it, because we're all kind of conditioned. Okay, every Sunday, we're even worse. I mean, we do the automatic withdrawal, so I don't even think about it. So, in terms of like whatever the need is, I just know that twice a month, bang bang, there it goes, done. I don't have to worry about it anything like that. But these guys, Paul shows up and, hey, there's Paul. Here, take our money. Literally, what they're doing. And they're poor. They're in severe trial, extreme poverty, and they're standing there with their money going to Paul. Here. Meanwhile, in Corinth, one of the commercial centers of the Roman Empire, they're arguing over Paul's apostolic authority about an offering. So you can see Paul has got these two things working against him here. They gave as much as they were able, sometimes more. This is just a side note here. That's why there's the brackets. This is usually referred to as proportional or proportionate giving. When people talk about giving, it's sermons on. Has anybody ever heard a sermon on giving? Has anybody not heard a sermon on? We were talking about sermons on giving today, coming up. Then I got off track, and then Debbie's jumping around in the car, going, "Right, focus, get back to the." No, I'm just kidding. But I didn't see her. I told her wouldn't notice it. Note that there's no mention of tithing here. Okay, so it's generally well known, especially among evangelicals, that tithing is a great standard. There's absolutely nothing wrong with tithing. By tithing, I mean giving 10% of your income to the church. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's a great standard. It's a great thing. But that is not a New Testament command. That was an Old Testament command to the Jewish nation. And there were actually multiple tithes. There was the tithe of this, there was the tithe of that, and kind of first fruits and this, that, and the other kind of thing. But it was, it's not, Paul is not telling, send your tithes to, give me your tithes. Certainly to the Corinthian church, because it was a mixed church. So if you go up to a Gentile in that time and say, hey, how's that tithe going? They'd be like, what's a tithe? Or they would, it was not they would have understood tithe means 10%, but they wouldn't have got the idea, the necessity of giving. But moving on in chapter 8, entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. Okay? And they exceeded our expectations. Because I don't think Paul was expecting anything. Or if it was just kind of a minimal sort of thing. They exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. Now this is kind of the point that Paul has been making all along with in the first 6 chapters of 2 Corinthians, that, if you're giving to me, you're giving to the Lord. If you're giving to the Lord, you're going to give to me, or you're going to support my position. If you support the authority of the Lord, you support my authority, kind of thing. He said that's what these guys in Corinth, or these guys in Macedonia did. Okay, they gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. So the first giving was to the Lord, then to Paul. Okay, so we urged Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. So Paul here, he's saying, and we're going to get to Titus, Paul's challenge to the Corinthians is to do the same, perhaps better. Okay? So we urge Titus, etc., verse 7, but since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. If these guys can do this out of extreme poverty, what could you do for the poor in Jerusalem in your relatively affluent position? Okay, so Paul is like, okay, guys, these guys are making you look bad. Okay, see that you excel also in the act of giving. I am not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. Okay, now Paul says, I'm not commanding you. That's one way to translate this. Now and I put this in here just for Debbie here. Notice another way to translate 8a, and I got this from the Net Bible. Actually, I thought I put it in there from the Net Bible. I'm not on the basis of a command. Okay. So it's not, Paul is clearly saying this is what you need to do. Okay, so really what I think what he's pointing out here is similar. Remember in 1 Corinthians when we talked about being single, when Paul says, well, this is not the Lord speaking but me, and this is not me speaking but the Lord, kind of going back and forth. That sometimes Paul is saying this is what the Lord says and this is what I say. And I think Paul's point here is like, this is what I'm saying, this is not the Lord. There isn't a command from the Lord in the Old Testament that I can pull up and say, here's why you need to do this. Although I think if he really wanted to look for one about helping the poor, I think he could have found one, because I think there's about 7,000 of them in the Old Testament. Okay, but he doesn't at this point. He just says, listen, guys, I'm testing the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. I've seen what these guys can do. These guys who are poor, who are in trial, I'm amazed by what they're doing. What are you doing? And he clearly is like, he's clearly comparing the two here. Okay. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. Okay. Now, again, I don't think he's talking financially here, but the point is, to me, I think the point Paul is making is like, look, I know you guys over there in Corinth may be thinking to yourself, well, what has the church in Jerusalem done for me? Why should I help them? And Paul is saying, listen, remember what Christ did for you. Okay? Remember what Christ did for you. That became poor so that you could become rich. You could have things that you never could have had. You wouldn't be in the church if it had not been for Christ becoming rich. I heard a sermon one time, and I've mentioned this a couple of times. We were in Michigan, and when we were in Michigan, we were kind of doing the church hunt, which is always a fun thing to do. And we're going to church. And one of the churches sent us a cassette tape. Remember cassette tapes? Does anybody remember cassette tapes? They were just after 8-tracks and just before CDs, right? Cassette, they're about this big. Sent us a cassette tape of that Sunday's sermon, and the sermon was when God became 3D. He was talking about the incarnation, right? And we look at that and think, wow, to become 3D is in animation and all is a really great thing. But when God became 3D, it was a limitation. I don't remember anything about the sermon. I really don't. I just remember the title and the kind of the image or the metaphor that it kind of represents. That the incarnation was God becoming 3D, like us, which is he didn't have to. So Paul's judgment here, and here's my judgment about what is best for you in this matter. Last year, you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means. Okay, this is where I get the idea that there was some commitment made. And Paul is like, okay, finish the work. So, now, I mean, if you think about that, so you compare what's happening between Corinth and Macedonia. So Corinth apparently is dealing with not following up on some particular commitment they made, even though they could. And Macedonia, who can't, is doing it anyway. Okay? So Paul is like, what's wrong with you people? Okay? Finish the work. Finish the work. That's, because, finish the work, that's what I titled this one. And I think this is Debbie's life verse for me. She quotes this to me all the time, because I am the king of the 95% project. You know what I'm saying, right? Am I right? You guys know with me? I can do 95% of a project better than anyone. That last 5%, every once in a while I'll walk through the house and I'll see something that I did in 1997 that is still not quite, I do need to do that. I should, because something else comes up, right? So he's saying, finish the work. Finish the work. You committed to it, finish the work. You committed to this offering, and I think that's interesting. Paul is saying you can do better. You have so much, they have so little, they gave so much, you've given so little. Okay. So, and here, let's see here. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. Okay, so obviously it's like, his point here is you have means. Make it happen. Our desire, so somewhere in here he says, where's the point? Oh, down there. Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard pressed, but there might be equality. Okay? Paul's judgment in 8:10 through 12 is to follow through, finish the work. And his goal is equality among the churches. Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard pressed, but that there might be equality. Okay, so it's like there shouldn't be, among the body of Christ, there shouldn't be want. There shouldn't be people in poverty. There should all be, and I think it goes through. I think he's making the point. There shouldn't be extremely rich, as well. That there should be a balance. That there should be equality. I don't know how else you want to. It's just a text, But there might be equality. At the present time, your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn their plenty will supply what you need. The goal is equality. As it is written, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Okay? Is equality among the churches. Okay? Thanks be to God, verse 16. Got to move along because I got to get through 2 chapters today. Thanks be to God who put in, verse 16, thanks be to God who put into the heart of Titus the same concern I have for you. For Titus not only welcomed our appeal, but he is coming to you with much enthusiasm and on his own initiative. Okay, so Paul says to Titus, hey Titus, listen, thanks for going to Corinth. Thanks for bringing that great report. Now go back and get the offering. It's like, Titus is sitting there, Paul, you could have phoned me up while I was there and told me while you're there, get it. But he doesn't. Titus is a nicer guy than me. I would have been like, well, thanks for telling me now. And we are sending along with him the brother who is praised by all the churches for his service to the poor. What is more, he was chosen by the churches to accompany us as we carry the offering, which we administer in order to honor the Lord himself and to show our eagerness to help. Okay, so Titus is going to be accompanied by a brother who is praised by all the churches, chapter 18. And then later on down, verse 22, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. In addition, we are sending with them our brother who has often proved to us in many ways that he is zealous, and now even more so because of his great confidence in you. So we know that Titus will be accompanied by a brother who is praised by all the churches, and another brother who is known for being zealous. Do we know who either of these two brothers are? No. Now there's speculation. Apollos comes to mind. You know, he would have been a great one to send. Um, um, well, Barnabas would have been another one. The two that he lived with and made tents with. Priscilla and Aquila. You know, Aquila, perhaps. Any number of people he could have sent. I don't know. He just sends two. And the point here, and what's kind of interesting here, is Paul says, I'm going to send Titus back, and I'm sending two other guys with him, so there will be no criticism. So Paul has got some, logistic cash control sense here. You know, he's like, okay, depending on how big the offering is going to be, this is, you don't want to be walking through that area, that location, with $20 bills hanging out of your pocket, kind of thing. Okay, not a good idea. Okay, so go with he's sending an entourage to pick up this offering. Okay. For Titus, not only welcomed, etc. What is more, he was chosen by the churches to accompany us. I read that. We want to avoid any criticism of the way we administer this liberal gift. Okay, so I think Paul is just pointing out that we want to be transparent, I think is the word that today we would use. We want to be transparent with how we're doing this. Okay, I've told you, it's going to be for the poor, and you're going to have these two guys and Titus. So you know that whoever these two are, they know him. They know who they are. They are. So it's like, okay. And Paul doesn't. I think Paul doesn't send himself because he thinks. Because if you remember back in 1 Corinthians, Paul talked about an offering. In 1 Corinthians 16, there's a mention of an offering, and he says, "Well, I don't want to come," and especially if there's somebody there who's giving grief about Paul's asking for this money, the farther Paul is away from the money, the better. I guess is what he's kind of thinking. So it's kind of interesting. Paul kind of has this sort of, accountability, transparency mindset in terms of this particular offering. Okay. Do we know who any of these are? No, we don't. Paul arranges this to avoid any criticism in verse 20. For we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of man. Okay. So again, I think that's just kind of an interesting, why do we, I'm a Congregationalist, okay, which is, a Congregationalist is, in terms of church polity, how your church is organized. And a Congregationalist kind of believes the congregation is what runs the church. Okay, so in our church, it's a Baptist church, there's a congregation, and the congregation elects the deacons, and the deacons represent the people, and the deacons kind of, make decisions and then everything comes back to the people eventually. There's budget. That's why do we vote on the budget? Okay, why is the numbers every week? Why do you see what the offering is in the church bulletin? Okay, not all churches do that. Okay. Some churches say, well, it's depressing. It's like, well, because if the money is less, or same thing, they're desperate. I'm not going to give my money there. What if it's way over? Then people go, oh, well, they don't need my money this week. And so there's people, but it's like, you know what? We're just trying to, right here, we're taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of man. Okay. In addition, and I read this passage already. In addition, we are sending with them our brother, who has often proved to us in many ways that he is zealous. Now even more so because of his great confidence in you. Okay, so they're sending Titus, who we know. They're sending person number one, who's praised by all the churches, and somebody who's very zealous, because that's what you need. And when it comes to ushering and collecting offerings, somebody who is zealous, somebody who's going to put the offering plate in front of you and say, "Not enough, more," kind of thing. I'm kidding. As for Titus, he is my partner and co-worker among you. As for our brothers, they are representatives of the churches and an honor to Christ. Therefore, show these men the proof of your love and the reason for our pride in you, so that the churches can see it. Okay. Paul is confident in I guess I'm got ahead of myself. There is no need for me to write to you about this service to the Lord's people, for I know your eagerness to help, and I've been boasting about it to the Macedonians, telling them that since last year in Achaia, you in Achaia were ready to give, and your enthusiasm has stirred most of them to action. Okay, so here Paul is saying, listen, I've been talking about you guys to the Macedonians, and one of the reasons here, apparently, one of the reasons why the Macedonians have given is because of how I've been talking about you. They're encouraged by your giving, which is really kind of interesting if you think about that dynamic. I mean, what poor person is going to say, oh well, if I'm trying to think of who, representative billionaire, a billionaire gives $1 million somewhere. I say, oh well, if that billionaire can give $1 million, then I can give 10% of my income. I mean, is that how it works in modern day U.S.? It doesn't work that way with me, because I sit there and go, okay, $1 million to a billionaire is, it's like a $10 bill to me. So here's $10, kind of thing. But that's just me. That's not Paul. Okay, so that's not on your handout. But I am sending you the brothers in order that our boasting about you in this matter should not prove hollow, but that you may be ready, as I said you would be. Okay, so as you listen to this whole passage, this is what I think, that this offering was what the problem was all along. That it always comes down to this offering, that Paul has been they said they were going to give a certain amount of money, a certain amount of goods, whatever it was, and it hasn't come. And Paul is like, I don't know if he's kind of resting his whole reputation on this, but, or taking their word for it. You said you were going to do this. Do it. Okay? For if any, but I am sending you the brothers in order that our boasting, etc., verse 4, chapter 9, verse 4, for if any Macedonians come with me and find you unprepared, we, not to say anything about you, would be ashamed of having been so confident. That would be a bad scene. Okay? If Paul is bringing the Macedonia along with, and the Macedonians are encouraged by how much the Corinthians have said they're going to give, and so he brings the Macedonia along, he goes to the Corinthian church, and the Corinthian church says, oh, no, Paul, we're not giving anything. So not only does Paul look bad, you've got a mad Macedonian. And I'm telling you, there is nothing worse than a mad Macedonian. Okay? I believe there was a wrestler once called, I don't know if that's true, I'm just making stuff up here. Debbie's jumping up going, hey, you're off track, get back on course. So I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to visit you in advance and finish the arrangements for the generous gift you had promised. Then it will be ready as a generous gift, not as one grudgingly given. Paul is confident in the Corinthians' eagerness to help, 9:2. Paul wants the gift to be seen as generous, not as one grudgingly given. Okay. Paul reminds the church, remember this, verse 6, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. So with, because Pastor Jarrett went to the gardening well, Debbie Ray, last week to get information on vines, I thought that I would go to the well and get information, but then I figured I live with this all the time, and I'm just telling you, she's going to agree with me. If you want 2 tomato plants, you have to plant 2 tomato plants. And sometimes you plant a lot and you don't realize how much you're going to get, but if you don't plant a lot, you're not going to get anything. That's a guarantee. If you don't plant tomatoes, you're not going to get tomatoes. Okay? When we were first married, this is when I first made my mistake. This is when, you ever look back and think, this is when I should have stopped it right then? Should have stopped it right then. 1993, Oak Forest, Illinois. She just wanted a little plot. I should have said no. I should have stopped it then, but I didn't. And then she came in. My second mistake. Can I grow squash? And I told her. I said, well, yeah. I don't really like squash. Which, of course, to Debbie is like the sin. Because all food is good to Debbie. And if you don't like any particular food, you're the problem, not the food. This is one of those things that when I defined the relationship with Debbie, we never really got this whole food thing straightened out. And I'm suffering with it now. But I don't like squash. Oh, it's okay. So she's going to plant squash. I don't know where she got the seeds, but I think she planted about 150,000 squash seeds. Because in this one little 4x8 lot, we got about 1.5 million squash plants. They were everywhere. I mean, they were going through the lawn, and it was like, I just wanted to run over them with the lawnmower and say, no, you can't do that. But I don't like squash. And it's okay. And so Debbie was convinced that the reason I didn't like squash was because I just hadn't had it in the right shape, size, pan, flavor, thing like that. So for the next several months, what's for dinner tonight? Well, we're going to have this, and squash this. And I'm a good husband, if I say so myself. She would feed, and I would eat it. I don't think I have ever. Well, there was one, but it wasn't something she made. I have never refused to eat a normal helping of anything my wife has made for me. Right? Have I? I don't think I ever have. So I would eat it. What do you think? She said, well, thank you for making this, but I don't like squash. Okay. Then the next thing it was squash pie, then squash souffle, squash this, squash that, squash this, squash that, kind of thing. It was like forever and ever squash. It was like nothing but squash. Squash here, squash there, squash chips, squash flakes, squash on bread, squash soup, squash smoothies. It was like squash everything, and every time I would do it, I'd say, well, I don't. Thank you for making this, but I don't like squash, kind of thing. And we survived that. I survived that. However, so now what happens is if she happens to be going through the gleaner stuff and sees squash, she figures that that's a sign from the Lord to try again, kind of thing. Or she'll, and there we go, we do it again. Or she'll see she'll see a squash recipe, something that involves squash, and she'll show it to me. She'll say, look at this recipe, this amazingly delicious recipe. I would love to make it, but somebody doesn't like squash. Kind of thing. So, what's for lunch today, dear? Yeah. I'm getting off track, kind of, yeah. So, needless to say, the best way to not have squash is to not reap or sow sparingly. I know you're thinking, wait, how is that going to, what do I have to do? Reaping and sowing sparingly. And so Paul, again, he's like, okay, guys, he's, given all of the grief he's been getting from the church at Corinth, I think he's just kind of trying to layer on the reasons here. Like, okay, remember, if you give grudgingly, say, okay, fine, here's $5. Then you're going to get back that much, kind of thing. So Paul reminds the church that those who who sow sparingly reap sparingly, and those who sow generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion. Have you ever been in an offering where you felt like you were under compulsion? I have. There's a lot of creative ways to people have come up with to give. Faith promises and capital campaigns and all that kind of stuff, and it's just, okay, it's just. I'm just sitting there kind of going, and I got Debbie, shut up or you're going to have squash for lunch, kind of thing, But it's, so Paul says, just decide what you're going to give. I expect it to be generous. You said it was going to be generous. The Macedonians are being generous. Decide what you're going to give. Decide now. So that when the three guys get there isn't okay, let's go through this again. Okay, don't be like the guy who stands in line at the fast food restaurant, 3 people deep, and then waits until he gets to the cash register to look at the menu and go, okay, what do I want? Oh yeah, there's an offering. What am I going to give? Like you come to church every Sunday. Every Sunday at every church, there's going to be an offering, right? So decide ahead of time what you're going to give. Decide yearly what you're going to give. That's the beauty of the the automatic thing. You make a decision once and off he goes, kind of thing. And God is able to bless you. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. You ever heard that passage used as an encouragement to the offering? Here it says, each believer should give what you have decided in your heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion. And the Net Bible Translator's note says, not out of a sense of duty. Gives that translator's note for that, not under compulsion, not under a sense of duty. Oh, it's the offering, I guess I got to give $1. And we all fall into this. I fall into this. We got to decide this. We got to figure out what we're going to do, kind of thing. It's like, whereas the Macedonians remember what he said about the Macedonians. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. Again, if we didn't take an offering, who would notice? How long would it take for you to notice? Okay, or anyone to notice. I'm not you in particular. We're just gotten used to it. It's just something we do. Are we sharing in the possibility? Okay. As it is written, and God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Okay. So is 9:8 a quid pro quo for 9:7? Meaning if you do 9:7, then 9:8 comes true. So 9:7 is decide in your heart to give. And then verse 8, and God is able to bless you abundantly. So therefore God will bless you abundantly. No. He's reminding him. Okay? Don't be worried about, I need this because what about a rainy day? And again, I understand that. Believe me, I'm all for saving for a rainy day. He says, don't forget, we serve the same God. And the God who is blessing the people in Jerusalem because of the earnestness of the people in Macedonia will also bless you for your giving. Okay? Paul quotes from Psalm 112, verse 9, as it is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor, their righteousness endures forever. In Psalm 112, and we're running out of time because somebody got off track, but there he's contrasting the wealthy and the poor, and he's pointing out that the wealthy who serve God are freely giving their gifts to the poor, and it's all coming back. They're still wealthy. So it's not like make yourself poor. If you're wealthy, don't make yourself poor. It's not like you have to give everything away. But it's like if you're wealthy and serving God, your gifts will scatter their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. Through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. Okay? If verse 9:11 is true, then the reason someone is rich, and I use the word in quotations there, is to help those who are not. Okay? The God is going to, this service you perform supplies the needs of the Lord's people, but overflowing because of the service by which you have proved, you will be enriched in every way so that, get the so that you can be generous on every occasion. Okay? I've often thought, when we look at, and I've had this discussion on the leadership board, that when we look at testing, we think things are testing, and we look at financial trials as being a test. Okay? We say, I lost my job, so now I suddenly have a financial test. I would suggest that a financial windfall is a test as well. That what do you do with a financial windfall is just as much a test. If you believe things are tested, if you look at your life as tested, it's like, if you lose money, if something happens that you lose income, people say, I'm being tested, I'm being tried, the Lord is trying to make me grow, kind of thing. All right? But if you get a windfall, we say, the Lord has really blessed me, I'm doing something right. And we don't think about the Lord is watching what I'm going to do. It gave me this particular windfall in order to benefit someone. Okay? But yet, so that you can be generous on every occasion. Okay? I know we've heard it in this church that, and we've got to get back to doing this. But, there are people that need, there are people that need help. There are people that are standing on street corners asking for $5 bills, asking for help, okay? And I know it's been said in this church, oh, you can't give it to them because they may use it to buy drugs, okay? So you shouldn't do that. I disagree. I mean, it's been winter time, so we haven't done this. So we've actually gone and get $100 and break it up into fives. And if I get near somebody like that, $5 or $10. Yeah, every time I can. Because you know what? They might go buy drugs. That's true. But there is no verse in the Bible that says, give to the poor so that they'll do what you want them to do. The Bible says, give to the poor. And maybe they are going to buy drugs with it. And maybe that drug hit that they get is the one that's going to put them in the hospital, that's going to hook them up with a doctor, that's going to get them healed and get them back to a productive life. It's weird supposition or speculation. It's just as likely, okay? And I mean, oh no, you know how much they're making? Have you ever heard that argument? They can make a lot of money doing that. Would you like to do that? Okay. Oh, they can make X number of dollars a day doing that. It's like, yeah, that's a sweet gig. Sitting there on a street corner, 9 out of every 10 cars is honking at you or is doing this. We've all done it, right? Suddenly it's like you're looking at your gas pedal. Oh, is that the gas pedal down there? It's like, why are we, and we are rich. Okay? I mean, we are rich. Oh no, I know somebody who's got more money. So what? We are rich. You compare any U.S. citizen, even poor by U.S. standards, are rich by the world standards. Okay. Paul sees the giving of the Corinthian church as a service. Now, he who supplies seed to the sower, you will be rich on every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. This service that you perform is not only supplying the Lord's people, but is overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. Because of the service by which you have proved yourselves, others will praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel of Christ and for your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. Okay? This service not only meets an actual need, it shows thankfulness to God. In verse 13, because of the service by which you have proved yourself, others will praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel and for your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. Okay? This giving goes along with one's confession of Christ. That if you're confessing Christ, this should be a given. And then in 14 and 15, I'll finish with the last two verses. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you because of the surpassing grace God has given you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. Now, usually when I've ever heard that verse, thanks be to God for his indescribable gift, you think about, his death on the cross. And that is an indescribable gift. There's no question about it. But what is Paul talking about here? What is the gift that God has given us in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9? What is the gift that God is that God has given us? Is the ability to give to others. Okay. The other thing here, and again, this is, Paul is talking about an offering. This is the final point I'll make, and this is kind of a side point. Paul is talking about an offering that's going to go help individual people. Okay. It's like, and I don't know when we lost that. Okay. We don't do that. People, somebody needs money, kind of thing. It's like, we'll have an offering. We'll have a major campaign to buy a new building or to build a new building. And I just say that because I have not been in this church where that happened. But I'm just saying, in the church at large. We need to buy a new this physical thing or that physical thing. We need to do this. And God loves a cheerful giver. God loves a cheerful giver who gives to help other people. And these are people that are never going to respond. We'll give an offering to fix our air conditioning because it'll make us more comfortable in the church service. We'll pat ourselves on the back and be like, aren't I a good, take the tax write off the whole 9 yards, right? But it's like these people will never respond. The people are never going to come back and go, oh, thanks. Until, of course, Paul says, if you get poor, then they're kind of thing. But it's, it's not, I say that to say it's not transactional. Okay. It's like, do this for me and I'll do this for you. Paul says, just do this. Just do it. You said you were going to do it. Finish the work. Okay. Any questions? Listen, I was going to go to lunch today, but I left my wallet at home. Can anybody loan me? Kidding. I'm kidding. Just checking. All right. Thank you very much. Next week we'll knock into chapter 10. We got through 2 chapters today, by the way. How about that, huh? So next week we'll get into chapter 10, and we'll take it from there. Thank you all for coming.